This webinar is part of a series that reflects between Noni Lasso and Emily Phillips Galloway from Harvard and Vanderbilt University, respectively, and the New York State Education Department. This webinar focuses on the role of assessment in a strategy to promote advanced literacies among all of today's students. As in many fields, effective educational practice starts with data, and yet there's no thornier issue within today's educational system than that of assessment. We began this two-part webinar focused on the architecture of a comprehensive assessment system. To strengthen the site's efforts, assist instructional leaders in choosing assessments to guide strong literacy instructions that result in these advanced literacies, and provide technical information about assessment types, taking time and feasibility into account. Here in Part 2, we attend to issues of implementation, the specific challenges and pitfalls related to assessment and their solutions, and strategies for making assessment instruction links to get to data-driven literacy instruction for all students. For those of you who might be new to this topic, additional information can be found through the New York State Education Department website, the website of the Office of Bilingual Education and World Languages, and the Regional Bilingual Education Resource Networks. We conclude this webinar by providing links to additional resources. This discussion about assessment and assessment systems for instructional improvement sits in the context of promoting advanced literacies for all learners. As you will recall, advanced literacies refer to a set of skills that support oral and written communication for a range of purposes with an ever-widening audience. These skills and competencies have become increasingly essential in today's classrooms and workplaces, where we are working collaboratively and in teams more than ever, attempting to solve problems instead of just acquiring information and then communicating our thinking to others. Advanced literacies are critical also to civic and social participation. Picking up on Part 1 of this webinar, we know that getting to data-driven literacy instruction means having an assessment battery with all three types of assessments: formative, screener, and outcome, but with a primary focus on the screening tool. Bear in mind that the screener is the anchor. In the first part of this webinar, we recommended that school and district teams take inventory of their current assessment practices, those assessments that are part of a formal battery and required or mandated by the state, district, or school determining each type. We also include suggestions for self-study. What did teams notice when they filled out the assessment inventory? How much time is spent on assessment across a school? So now what? Well, we suggest using this inventory as a springboard to get to real action by next planning a comprehensive yet streamlined assessment system. After studying the site's inventory, the team may look to revise its approach to assessment. The team often decides to administer screening assessments on a set schedule 3 times per year, Figure 5.4. This is in part to address the time-consuming and problematic practice of using their formative measures as screening tools. The screener, along with the outcome measure, is the basis for a timetable for assessment, focusing on measurement that reflects grade-level expectations for literacy development. At this point, the team also often appropriately decides that because formative assessments are closely tied to daily instruction, meant to be teaching tools, teachers should determine the timing of their administration. This strategy often represents a major shift. Previously, teachers would have been required to administer formative assessments, such as Fountas and Pinnell's Benchmark Assessment or the DRA, on a set calendar. They would also be compelled to report scores to the principal or data coordinator. We recommend abandoning this practice because there is no other use for data from these assessments beyond designing tomorrow's lesson or a targeted support plan for an individual student. For that reason, they should be administered as needed. And in making this change, there is a huge savings in collective time and energy. In fact, one of the greatest benefits of implementing screeners is that they can reduce the amount of time spent on assessment. We have found that 2 different screeners, for example, at 3 points in the year, can be administered in no more than 26 hours, approximately half the amount of time used for assessment in many schools today. With the architecture of a system in place, the types, the appropriate timing, and the timetable, it is important to create a data system that makes scores clear and accessible for translating to practice. The most straightforward system, and the most economical, is actually a simple electronic spreadsheet stored on a secure, shared drive, with a separate sheet for every classroom or grade level. Workbooks can be formatted so that cells are automatically color-coded based on the value of the scores that are entered. It's a matter of setting threshold numbers for high-risk, some-risk, and low-risk scores, such that cell values within these ranges will automatically turn red, yellow, and green, respectively. Once the table is formatted, a small team of school staff can enter results into this shared workbook, which automatically generates a color-coded table, as well as figures where students' instructional needs are highlighted and visible across the school. See Figure 5.5. The next year, students' scores can be cut and pasted into their new classrooms, providing an easy-to-access archive of their literacy development. In addition, spreadsheets and workbooks can easily generate various tables and charts, as well as sort students from lowest to highest scores. In a school climate that is sensitive to others' viewing scores, it is possible to set up a password-protected workbook for each teacher on a shared drive that is still viewable by school leaders. Finally, once the right assessments are in place and the data can be easily accessed for analysis and review, what do we mean by linking data to instruction to get to advanced literacies for all? To support teachers in understanding their classroom-level data, we recommend setting up data teams comprised of individuals in the school with some expertise in literacy development, including educators, who can together support sense-making. This use of collaborative teaming isn't trivial. When teachers work in these structures, they often make fewer referrals to special education, especially for linguistically diverse students. Gravois and Rosenfield, 2006. We have also found it useful for teachers to meet in grade-level teams or problem-solving teams to share and discuss their findings. Klingner and Eppolito, 2014. Very often, the areas of greatest need are shared across classrooms, opening up dialogue on how to best support these learners given their age and the curricular materials available. Hager, Klinger, and Aceves, 2009. In these initial meetings, the color or symbol-coded tables and charts help focus participants on the task at hand, to talk about instructional needs at a classroom level. These teams shouldn't just meet to examine screening data. They should also look at formative assessment data to understand individual learners' development across the academic year. To begin to answer this question, we provide an organizing structure, a decision tree, for understanding and undertaking the process of building an instructional core that fosters advanced literacy skills by focusing on the aggregate needs of a school population surfaced in the data, and for identifying students whose needs are not otherwise being met by the core curriculum and who will require targeted instruction. The decision tree brings clarity by providing a set of organizing steps and their corresponding questions for school-based teams to follow. It is a flexible framework, one that can be applied at the level of the school and the classroom. Here, you will see that the decision tree starts out with a key question about an individual student who is struggling. Is the student's problem unusual given peers' performance? Before generating a plan for any student, we have to be able to answer this key question. You may be asking, how would we know if a student's difficulties are different? Once we're able to answer that question, it takes us down one of two pathways. The first focuses on adjusting the instructional core before locating the problem at the level of the individual, Pathway 1. While the second focuses on designing literacy interventions to support individual strugglers, Pathway 2. In other words, Pathway 1 focuses our attention on a learner's need in relation to his classmates, while Pathway 2 keeps us focused on the individual. In walking these two pathways, we address the need to focus on the instructional core in settings where high numbers of students are considered at risk for reading difficulty. To move instructional practice forward and support all students to develop advanced literacy skills, schools need to be able to respond to this data differently. By tailoring the instructional core and by providing intervention to only those readers who persistently struggle despite maximal opportunities to learn and practice their skills and competencies through daily instruction. You may wonder why we place such a heavy focus on understanding a learner's profile in relation to peers. Well, the issue is this. Viewed separately from his peers, a student may appear to be a struggling reader. Viewed in relation to his peers, he may demonstrate similar strengths and challenges as the majority of his classmates, and even have difficulties that are not as severe as some. This is not to say that we wouldn't support the student's literacy development. We absolutely would, but within the instructional core. We would not refer this learner for literacy intervention services just yet because we certainly can't refer the majority of students, nor can we claim with certainty that this student population has had sufficient, tailored opportunities to learn the skill or competency. In other words, the trends in the data suggest that the best support is likely at the level of the instructional core, i.e., the daily plan for learning and teaching, so that his needs and those of his classmates are better met, and our instructional time and learning opportunities are maximized. The instructional core is, after all, our most significant instructional resource. Keep in mind that students spend nearly 30 hours each week in the classroom, nearly 1,080 hours per year. The second pathway of the decision tree identifies readers whose literacy needs are unlike those of their peers in either type. Students who persistently struggle with word reading skills, for instance, or severity. Notably, a single data point collected via screening initiates targeted instructional support, but is never used to make high-stakes decisions about a student, e.g., to determine special education classification. Because language development can sometimes look like a learning difference, schools should keep these considerations in mind when examining linguistically diverse students' literacy data and when referring students to interventions. In sum, we should be able to ask these questions when we have a system in place that allows for efficient and impactful assessment. What percentage and/or number of students are at risk in each of these areas we assess? How do these rates differ by grade level? What are our instructional strengths, weaknesses? What are our priority issues? Before we wrap up, let's take a few minutes and talk about the special case of native language assessment, as well as the newcomer population in relation to school-wide assessment practices to support literacy improvement. Let's start with the issue of native language assessment. As we aim to better serve English language learners in bilingual education settings, and as we continue to ensure we are capturing their strengths in all types of programs, in many cases, we revert to the idea that native language assessment is a good idea. So, when is literacy assessment in the native language a good idea? There are two key conditions to guide the answer to this question. Most straightforward. If literacy instruction is in the native language, then assessment should be in the native language. Less straightforward is the answer to this question when instruction is not in the native language. It takes sound professional judgment in administering and interpreting the results of native language assessments administered to ELLs in English-only instructional environments. Here are a few very specific considerations. First, the primary uses of assessment information in the native language is to guide instructional planning and support student improvement. The information should be used for investigative and informational purposes, not for making high-stakes decisions. There may be instances where it is helpful to know what a child knows in the native language and use this knowledge to bridge to English instruction. Second, native language assessments with external benchmarks were most often designed for and normed on monolingual samples, receiving all instruction in the language of the assessment, e.g., learners in Puerto Rico. Scores for U.S. ELLs must therefore be interpreted accordingly. Third, and related to the second, as students acquire a second language, one language may be more dominant because they are using that language more than the other at a particular point in time. Frequently, children demonstrate a language imbalance as they progress toward bilingualism. During this time, children may not perform as well as native speakers in either language. This is a normal and most often temporary phase of emergent bilingualism. Finally, many ELLs in the U.S. are also behind in their development of academic language in their native language because they are growing up in poverty, which influences their formal language learning opportunities. And what about assessment and newcomers? A special subgroup within the ELL population who are recent arrivals to the U.S. Some of these students are new to formal schooling entirely and face the task of acquiring both a novel language and new content. whereas others who have participated in formal schooling in their home countries will face the challenge of translating content knowledge acquired in their native language to English. For both types of newcomers, oral and written assessments will guide a support plan. To that end, it's worth considering where the school-wide assessment practices fit in. Well, this will depend upon how and where the newcomer student is served. If the newcomer is being served in a classroom with non-newcomer peers and there is an assessment system in place, then once the student has sufficient proficiency to take the assessments, this student should be assessed. These assessments may provide helpful information, especially if administered over time, to support instructional planning. Within newcomer programs, assessment should be used to monitor progress, and many of the principles of data-driven assessments apply. But this is likely not a setting for a formal English literacy assessment. Most centrally, we should not ever make high-stakes decisions regarding students' academic progress using one data source, and so for all students, including those learning English as an additional language, our assessment practices should seek to aggregate data sources in order to understand a learner's needs. In this two-part webinar, we have taken on the topic of assessment and provided an express tour of the topic for school and district teams. Part 1 of the webinar provides an introduction to our vision for 21st century assessment, focused on building an assessment system with the right types of assessment and the efficiencies to get to data use. Part 2 is implementation-focused, with the goal of getting to tight links between data and instruction, resulting in a stronger core of instruction to match more readers' needs, and from there, implementing more targeted approach for those readers who need further supports. Across the two webinars, we focus on 3 key assessment-related steps to serving all students. The first step is to implement screeners to measure and target specific literacy skills. The second step is to distinguish the unique struggler from the population by analyzing the reader profile in the context of peers. And the third step is to match the instructional core to the group's needs and tailor interventions to the individual's needs. Thank you for joining us. For more on the topic of advanced literacies and the next generation P12 learning standards, please refer to a series of briefs posted for download from the New York State Education Department website. And additional resources for deeper study and learning can be found at the websites listed on the screen. Next, in Part 2 of this two-part webinar focused on assessment, we attend to issues of implementation, the specific challenges and pitfalls related to assessment and their solutions, and strategies for making assessment instruction links to get to data-driven, tailored approaches to meet all learners' needs.